Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Joe Nuxhall, My Life, Baseball, and Beyond. Joe, you've been invited to Tampa, Florida for spring training in the 1952 season. Take us through that process.
Well, we're a little ahead there, DJ, when we look at spring trainings, because really the first spring training that I spent with the Reds was in 1945 in Bloomington, Indiana. And of course, that again during the war. And the Reds, I think, trained over there for 2 or 3 years at the Indiana University, and they had a good facility when I look.
Indoors.
What I recall.
Indoors.
Yes, they had the big field house, and I believe it's still there. But they were able to make an infield and had netting for the guys to take batting practice, and then on given days they were able to. The baseball diamond was right across the street. And they were able to get out on given days, not too often, but I always remember during that period going to French Lick, Indiana. And I believe I think it was either White Sox or the Cubs trained there. And I recall driving down there with the ball club, and when we got there, the ball diamond was flooded. And we stayed in the hotel there at French Lick, and I always remember the hot spring baths. Mm-hmm. And it smelled like
sulfur,
hard-boiled rotten eggs, I guess the best way to describe it. I'll never forget that. So anyway, that was one spring training, and then I went from there to back to school at the high school, and then after school was out, I went to Syracuse, New York, and when I got to Syracuse, I always remember going to New York. This is all totally new, and we took the train to New York, and we at that time Newark and Jersey City were part of the International League, and we stayed in New York. And I recall going into Grand Central Station, and I had a suitcase, and I had a bat tied to it. And in fact, I think I went from here to New York, not even stopping in Syracuse. And I always recall we stayed in the Roosevelt Hotel, and I can remember the gate that we came in on was, you've been through Grand Central Station?
Yes, I have.
Well, you know how big it is. Mm-hmm. Well, it just so happened that where we came in, the train came in, was the furthest distance away from the hotel, and you could walk through the Grand Central and down his hallway, and the Roosevelt Hotel had an entrance there where you could go up into the lobby. So I always remember that. And then I had the first experience on the subway system, where we would take the subway out to Jersey City. I believe we always played both teams. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you went to New York, you played Jersey City and Newark, but you took the sub, and you came out of the tunnels, and you went across I guess it was the Hudson River, I assume, and into Jersey City and back, and so on and so forth. So I'll never forget that.
Your dad steered you clear, I understand, of breaking balls when you were a youngster.
Absolutely. He would not. In fact, I played 7 years in the minor leagues, and the first time I really knew how to throw a curveball, or felt that I did, was in 1962. When I came back to the Reds, and Jim Turner was the pitching coach. He called him Milkman Jim when he pitched for the Reds, and he absolutely taught me how to throw a curveball. And until that time, I tried to throw it, but the mechanics of it, no one really had the right explanation to me, I guess is the proper word to use. And Jim was the one that really got me into the right delivery of the curveball. And but as far as, my dad just said, try to get a good rhythm and try to take as much pressure off as your arm as you can in throwing the ball. And control was something that my dad even tried to instill in me, but it took a while for that to show up, as we all know. But still, the curveball is, it can be taught, where I don't think anybody can teach you to throw the baseball hard or, with consistency.
And you could do that. You could throw a baseball hard.
That's right. People have asked me what would they say the velocity on my fastball was when I was 15 years old, and I would say probably 85 to 87 miles an hour, which of course later on improved to somewhere in the mid-90s. I would guess.
Kind of like a space shot, though. When you're off a quarter inch at launch, you're in another universe. Control was a problem.
Absolutely. I think one year at Columbia, South Carolina, gosh, I'm trying to recall. I think I pitched either 77 or 97 innings and walked 150. That's not too impressive.
Now, I have a question here. You say that you are carrying a bat with you, a pitcher cherishing a bat.
Oh, yeah.
You really prided yourself on your offense and your fielding as well.
Well, it was nice to have your own bat. I recall, I think someone at Bloomington, one of the guys, and I can't recall exactly who it might have been, gave me a bat, and I cherished it, and I didn't get to use it much, but still, I had my own war club, so to speak.
Well, that's to this day, when you're on the radio, you say, and always have, if you swing the bat, you're dangerous, and you do not accommodate any pitcher that gets up there and takes 3 strikes.
No, that's one of the things that upsets me about the American League and the DH. To me, a pitcher is not 8.5; he's number 9 in the lineup, and I guess it's just the way I was brought up. When we talked on the other shows about my dad, being a total part of a ball club. Certainly, I wasn't Stan Musial or Ted Kluszewski or anyone, but I really feel that when my name was announced as a pitcher on this particular night, that they did mention my name as far as how we're going to pitch somebody, and I took pride in that because again, I never felt that I was 8.5. I was the 9th man in the lineup, and I always said whatever a pitcher might be able to do with the bat can help himself, might win him a ball game, might keep him in a ball game, where normally the skipper would say, well, we got a chance to tack on a couple of runs here or catch up or whatever it might be, or go ahead a couple of more runs, pinch hit for you as opposed to leaving you in the ball game.
Your old friend Bobby Knight says everyone has the will to win, not everyone has the will to play defense. You had the will to play defense. You always hustled at that facet of the game as well.
Well, I guess the easiest thing for me to look at as a ball player is 90 feet, and I still get upset when I see guys hit ground balls and just jog to first base. Even pitchers, a pitcher, it's changed. There's no question about it. But that was one of our strong points, was running. That's how you stayed in shape to pitch, is you did a lot of sprints. And I've always said, if you can't run 90 feet, then what are you doing around here? 90 feet isn't that far. And so many individuals you see that, they just say, well, I'm out. And we've witnessed games where the pitchers that hustle, that they have caused problems for the opposition's defense, because whoever it might be, a shortstop or a third baseman, say, well, the pitcher hit it, I'll just kind of take my time and he look up, and now the guy is a step and a half from first base, and all of a sudden they say, boy, we got to get it over there, and they might throw it in the stands. So, I know it won't happen that often, but the possibility of it happening is always there.
So this obviously puts you in good stead with guys like Wally Post, Gus Bell, Ted Kluszewski. You don't think of those guys as being malingerers. They were always about the game, focused, and their heads were into it. Well,
they're always like that. I think today's players are like that, basically. But back then, everybody talked about baseball. If you sat down in the clubhouse, somewhere as you chatted, you would talk about last night's game. You might talk about tonight's game, facing the pitcher. You might talk about a game 2 weeks ago in that vein, because baseball was your life. I mean, back then. I mean, you played baseball. In the wintertime, you worked. I mean, that's the way it was. That's how you made ends meet. And so the conversations were always basically about the game of baseball. You know, what would you do in this situation, or how did this happen, and so on and so forth. And I think when you mentioned the names of Wally and Ted and Gus and Roy McMillan, Ed Bailey, all those individuals were very talented and knowledgeable baseball individuals.
I want to get to the off-season jobs in a moment, but let's revisit that group of guys in 1952 and thereafter. Very close-knit, a tremendous kinship. It's been said that nowadays, after a ball game, 25 players get in 25 different cabs and go in 25 different directions. You people socialize together, even on your days off.
Well, I think, Denny, that had a lot to do, too, with our travel back then, too. You know, that was probably a bigger part of it as anything, because we would spend traveling, 10, 12 hours together on an on a train, going to wherever it might be. And we always, getting back to what we were talking about just a moment ago, would sit in a club car on the train and talk baseball. So that was certainly a part of the closeness we had with all of us. Many times on off days, the families would get together and have picnics. I can always recall talking about spring training, that every year, before we broke camp, we'd choose one day in Tampa, Florida. We go out on Davis Causeway, which is Route 60 to Clearwater, and we would choose a spot where they had a grill and a shelter, and the kids, everybody bring their children, and all of us would go out there and we'd have a picnic. Kids could swim, and it was just really a family type atmosphere for the whole ball club, and that's something I think all of us would say we're very proud of. But still, the conversation and talking about baseball back then was very prevalent, without a doubt. But of course, there wasn't a heck of a lot of things to do back then like there is now.
Off-season jobs, we talked about that briefly. What did you do during the off-season, and what were some of the pastimes and pursuits that guys had to do during the off-season because they frankly didn't make the big money?
Well, a lot of us, I know probably the first thing that I did, major league-wise, was work for a tire company in Hamilton, Bob Shute, a friend of mine who had a General Tire Agency, and he asked me if I would like a job for the winter selling tires. I'm still embarrassed over that. I didn't sell a set of tires all winter. But I always remember, he said, Joe, Mr. Fitton, who was the president of the First National Bank, he said, Mr. Fitton's will need some tires. So he says, I want you to go up and talk to him. And I knew Mr. Fitton. So they had a tire back then called a Dual 90, General Tire Company. And now, let's see, the dealership was 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. But it was right down High Street, the main street in Hamilton. So he said, he gives me this Dual 90 tire. Now, he said, you go down and see Mr. Fitton. So I got to hang that tire over my shoulder, and I'm walking down High Street to see Mr. Fitton about buying a set of Dual 90 tires, which was their #1 tire. Needless to say.
Is that where they got the idea for the Michelin Man?
Apparently. Apparently. So anyway, that was one of the jobs. And then, of course, I would get jobs because of basketball, too. I worked a couple of winters at Mosler Safe Company. I worked at Estate Stove, Bendix Aviation, where else? Fisher Body. But some of the interesting jobs, one of the interesting jobs I had as a kid, talking about this, was I think I was probably 13 years old, if I remember correctly, 13 or 14. but they were building a pipeline, a gas pipeline through Butler County. And just above New Miami, they were going under the Route 127 and the Pennsylvania Railroad. And back then they had nothing like they have today. You know, they have machinery to do it today, but back then, just pure labor did it. So I got a job, and it paid pretty good for a kid, you know. And they were doing this, and they had an auger, and the pipe, it was on a pipe, and it was about this big around. And they had a lot of high school kids, and what you would do was kind of the old heave-ho bit, you know. Mm-hmm. You'd stand with your back to where you're digging, and they'd say, you know, I forget, let's say heave-ho, heave-ho, heave-ho. So you did that all day. And one day the boss man came by and he said, is there a Joseph Nuxhall here? Yeah, right here. He said, come here. He said, how old are you? I said, I'm 15. He said, how old are you? I said, I'm 15. He said, you sure? And I said, well, he said, you're 14, aren't you? I said, well, yes, sir. He said, well, you can't work here. He said, you just can't work here. And so I lost my job there. So later on, I had a job with the county. And what we did back then was gravel roads, a lot of gravel roads throughout all counties, Butler where I was. And so what we did was spread calcium in order to knock down the dust. And I always remember getting in the back of one of those trucks, and that calcium, we had boots on, but that was all loose, and as you worked there, you get up and that darn calcium would get down in your boots, and you come up and just, you know, oh, terrible burn. And then I had another job. Well, it was the same year in New Miami, the creek, I think it's 4 Mile Creek, they had high water, so a lot of timbers and stuff came down, and they hit against the abutments of the bridge. So they said one day they took us out there and wanted us to go down in there with crowbars and break that stuff loose. Well, I guarantee you, unless they found it, that crowbar is still there because I dropped the sucker. And then I had a job with in the off season. No, I tell you, this job had to do with when I was getting my eligibility back to play high school sports, and they were building Fisher Body, and I got a job with a steel company and putting the roof on Fisher Body. Well, the job was furnishing the iron workers with these sheets. They were probably about 10 feet long and about 3 or 4 foot wide, and you would take them, and the iron workers would weld them to the roof. And so you'd start a new section. Now you got to carry this thing probably, I'd say it was at least 20 feet across beams like that, and you're about, I guess, 40 feet off the ground. And me and my buddy, I forget his name, but I'll tell you what, we dropped a whole bunch of those suckers when that wind was blowing. So that was another job. And another job we had in the off season was, I always remember it was a fence company, was building a fence around Fisher Body, but they had a side job at Wyoming High School, a football field. They were going to put a fence around that. So again, no mechanical tools back then to dig post holes. It was bingo, that's right. So we would go down there and just a beautiful dirt. I mean, nice and soft, you know, and dry. And you get kind of in a la-la land, you know. And they had these big oak trees around that place. And this one day, I was just in la-la land with them, and I went down like that and hit a root that big around. And I said, well, there goes my arm and everything. Boy, it jarred me to pieces. So that was some of the off-season jobs.
But all of these served to keep you in the neighborhood during the off-season. And I think that's why people back then had more of a connection with players, right or wrong?
Well, that's true. And, you know, we've always said that, and really, I guess the problem, in a sense, nowadays is the fact that none of the players stay on, like Barry Larkin staying around for all the years he did. That was, kind of strange, really. But I think that's one of the things about our game today, that the fans really don't get that familiar with the players like back then with, Clu and Gus. Wally, of course, lived in St. Henry. But Johnny Temple stayed here sometimes. Roy McMillan had pizza restaurants here. Clu had the steakhouses. Gus, I think, sold cars and what have you. A lot of times, Herm Wiemeyer and John Parmesa, we all, at one time, as I said, worked for Burger Brewery, and then John Parmesa and Herm Wiemeyer wound up with ABC Freight Forwarding, and Herm became pretty high in their organization. In fact, moved to Dallas, Texas. And Roy, of course, as I say, had pizza parlors. Clu actually he had 3 steakhouses at one time, and they were great guys. And we got out. I think one of the keys is back then is the players got out in the winter and sold the baseball and the Cincinnati Reds, and as opposed to nowadays where the guys, you can't blame them. What the heck, they get paid very well, and they get the heck out of the cold weather and head south or wherever it might be. But I think one of the things back then, as I say, is the fact that the players got out and sold their profession, so to speak.
Men of Waithoit's generation handed down to men of your generation and bequeathed to you not only the tradition, but some of the etiquette and some of the nuances of baseball. Have those nuances and those courtesies carried over into this generation, or has it been lost somewhere, the etiquette of baseball?
Well, I think back then there was none, like you see, you go out to the ballpark, out to the Great American Ballpark during batting practice, and you might see the opposing players talking to one of our guys. But one of the things that really gets to me, in all honesty, is like 20 minutes before a ball game starts, and you'll see both sides, the Reds and the Giants, whoever it might be, the loosening up, running, and out in dead center field, you'll see them shaking hands, hugging each other, and that just drives me up a wall. I mean, it's not that I don't believe in friendships with the opposition, but to me, when you as a fan walk into a stadium and you're paying $25 or whatever it might be to see a ball game, and you look out and see that going on, I can't agree with that. I mean, that tells me that, but I guess one of the reasons for it is the Players Association or the union. They're a very strong group of men, and more power to them.
Didn't there used to be signs posted, no fraternization?
Oh, yeah.
I recall that.
Yeah, well, the umpires used to come out. I don't know if they're required to do it anymore, but umpires had to be out at least an hour before game time or during batting practice. And any time they saw anything like this going on, it was a fine. But as far as I know today, that's not true.
No pitching inside anymore. No backing people off the plate.
That's one of my pet peeves also, because I honestly don't think anyone pitcher tries to really hurt anybody. But it is, we have said, and we've had our pitching coaches tell us over the years that a certain part of that plate is yours as a pitcher, and the certain part of it belongs to the hitter. And when they start fooling with your part of the plate, then you have to do something about it, and that has to do with pitching inside. And that's part of the makeup of a pitcher. And you hear the stories about, well, I guess Roger Clemens nowadays, he'll come in there and come in there hard. Back in our day, you had Sal Maglie, they call him the barber, because he pitch inside. Don Newcomb, Carl Erskine, just all the pitchers back then pitched inside. But nowadays, the poor umpire, he is in charge of all this, and certainly they make some decisions that are really questionable about a pitcher throwing inside, and at the second time after you've been warned, you're out of the game, and the manager goes, and all those type things. But still, you have to pitch inside, and it's something that is trying to be instilled in any pitcher, that that's part of your repertoire, we'll say. And the more control of it you have, then the more success you should have. And nowadays, it's interesting. I watch every once in a while, well, not every once in a while, we have in the radio booth, we have a monitor, and we see guys get hit by pitches that are, maybe 6 inches inside. And sometimes they want to charge the mound. But you look, and as I've said so many times over the last few years, that if you see 10 individuals hit, then I'll guarantee you 7 of them, in a sense, hit themselves because of the way they teach hitting now, is that your front shoulder, a right-handed batter, is like this, going in instead of straight out. In certain pitches, they can't get out of the way of. And that's, but if I were a pitching coach, I said, hey, I'll be right by your side, pal, if they want to come out, but you pitch inside. If they don't like it, that's the way the cookie crumbles.
And we will pick up that story when we return during our next visit with Joe Nuxhall. Until then, for Joe Nuxhall, Dennis Jansen, for Joe Nuxhall, My Life, Baseball, and Beyond. Thanks for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye.